issue, I don't doubt, with his treasurer, Gladys Berejiklian. Let's just have a listen in and then we'll come back to Craig Kelly.
You can make a decision, well, that's for someone else to deal with, or you can decide, you know, we have to do something today to look after future generations. And I strongly believe that's what the decision we are making today in terms of the policies that we put forward start to do. It's critical we do that. We don't want to be in a position where we're kicking the problems down the road. It's important we get to a position where we have an understanding on how we are going to fund health costs into the longer term. And in addition, we strongly believe we should be finishing the Gonski Agreement to ensure every single child is given an opportunity to see whether these funds make a difference in terms of educational outcome. Now, we are determined to do what is right for the people of this state and across the country. Some of the things that we put forward, obviously, aren't easy, but we strongly believe they are the right thing to do. What we have tried to do today is to bring some consensus around the debate. There's been a lot of debate upon how we are going to fund things into the long term, how the tax system should be structured as we deal with those challenges. And as we've listened to all the stakeholders, I want to thank the Prime Minister and the Federal Treasurer for overseeing a debate that I think has been very constructive. And we want to take that debate further today. In simple terms, what we're saying in that consensus, the federal government is very keen for a growth agenda. Well, we're saying, well, if the GST is raised, that gives a capacity for the federal government to change the tax mix and to drive a growth agenda. How they mix it is up to them, obviously, and there's lots of modelling that they could do to ensure that the best possible outcomes are achieved. But there's no doubt if there is lower income tax, there's an incentive to work. If there's lower corporate tax, there's an incentive to employ, and that ultimately leads to economic growth. If you look at where the federal budget is and you look where the state budgets are as the health costs start to bite in just a few years' time, we cannot spend money we don't have. Indeed, we know that health is not funded. So growing the economy gives us a capacity for more revenue, and most importantly, in terms of the agreement we put forward, we have a capacity to do it together. And I certainly think that's what the community is looking for. Governments of all persuasions to put aside whatever interests they might have to come together working for the people they're given the privilege to be elected by. Certainly, in terms of the funds, part of that agreement, giving the federal government their growth agenda, what we are saying is that from a state and territory point of view, we want to see the health funding returned to a level that is sustainable, as opposed to where it was back in 2014, and the completion of the Gonski Agreement, which I've said we want to have the capacity to assess it, to determine whether it is actually providing the benefits that we hope it does. And as that does, that obviously becomes a priority for educating kids into the future. So today's a day about trying to bring some consensus and shape to a debate that's very important, and we're determined to do what we think is right for the long-term interests of people in this state and ultimately the country. I'll ask the Treasurer to say a couple of words and then take questions.
Thank you, Premier. We believe very strongly that this package ticks all the boxes. We're a strong government with a strong budget, but even a government with a strong budget has its limits. And we're here because we want to ensure the future of the great standards that we enjoy here in New South Wales in health into the medium and longer term. I have to say I'm also very heartened by the way in which the states are moving closer together. We have much that we agree on. And I also feel that there is growing momentum to make sure there's an outcome which supports the states, but also gives the flexibility to the federal government.
Prem, does the 15% GST become a massive electoral liability for Malcolm Turnbull in the federal election year?
I mean, ultimately what the federal government will do, they'll bring forward their policies and agendas they want to take to the people of Australia. But what the federal government has been very clear on is that they want a growth agenda. We think what we put forward today provides that opportunity. I mean, how are you going to get to the position you want to encourage people to work, you want to encourage people to employ? And I certainly think, yes, this will be a challenge. There's no doubt about it. We've already heard some of the scare campaigns today, but it's right and it's in the long-term interests of every person in this country. And ultimately, it'll be a matter for the federal government to take forward, but we are keen to support, because ultimately what this is about, if you grow the economy, you've got greater capacity to fund the critical services, such as health, that people rely on a daily basis. Well, that is the most important thing we can do.
Premier, being upfront about the 15% GST, are there any other alternatives that you're willing to listen to, or you're just on?
Well, I mean, I think that the reason this package works is, if you look at the competitiveness of the country, it is very clear that the tax mix is working against us. So income tax, a good example, we sit right at the top in terms of being uncompetitive with the rest of the world. Similarly with the corporate tax rate. Our GST is right down the bottom. So raising the GST, it still remains right down one of the lowest in the world. And bringing back income tax and corporate tax, well, it brings us back to a much more competitive position. So when you're competing for jobs and investment and head offices and encouraging people to go out and work, well, there's more incentive to do all of those. So I think this package brings that together. But again, this debate is not finished. We remain very open to other ideas and proposals put forward. But as the Treasurer said, I think we're at a position, we're moving to more of a position of consensus amongst the states. But ultimately, there's still some way to go.
What's New South Wales?
If this is a good idea, then why are welfare groups and charities opposed to it?
And look, obviously we're prepared to sit down and work with the welfare groups. I mean, the compensation arrangements are critical, and that's something that we have said all along in this debate. We would only consider it if those lower income households were protected, those disadvantaged families were protected in terms of the burden of this. And obviously that is something that we work through not only with the Federal Treasury and the governments and the state governments as we run through this, but ultimately with the key welfare groups. We want to ensure that the concerns are taken away from those groups, because by providing that compensation, you're doing exactly that. So looking after those who need to be looked after, improving the mix, providing encourage to invest and work at the same time critical funds for our schools and hospitals. This is a good deal for the people of New South Wales and I believe Australia.
You've spoken to the need to stimulate employment growth and the opportunity to do that. What's New South Wales bring to the table in terms of incentives to employers as part of the package you're wanting to put forward?
We have been doing a lot in relation to try and grow our economy here in New South Wales, whether it be taking away payroll tax for new jobs. We've done that. We've raised the threshold. We've reduced the cost of premiums, such as workers' compensation premiums on businesses. So we've tried to take away and lower the costs of businesses, and I think what you've seen here in New South Wales is a good example. I mean, the jobs growth has been strongest here in New South Wales on the back of some of that program. So we will continue on those sort of measures, but coupled with the growth package outline, which would be ultimately up to the federal government, I think it's very powerful. We go to the people across this country and say, well, we want our economy to grow the strongest it possibly can be, and if it does, more opportunities for employment, and that growth obviously then provides revenues for the critical services that we need.
Premier, you're relying on, I think, economic growth from the tax cuts to provide $7 billion in revenue over 4 years, you say, will cover Gonski and the health fund to 2020. Have you modelled the impact of those tax cuts on economic growth to show that $7 billion will actually materialise, or is this a bit of a guess on your part?
No. I mean, there's a range of modelling in terms of economic growth, but that is preliminary and obviously would have to be worked through. But there is modelling. Yes. I mean, there is some preliminary, and there's a number of people that put it out. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, some of the accounting firms have put out modelling that show some of the cuts we're talking about provides economic growth. But importantly, the decision in relation to the 7, well, that would be a matter for the federal government to determine whether it's part of this tax take or whether they look for other initiatives to fund it. Ultimately, it's up to them. But certainly, I mean, what you can see from what we put forward, we're giving big flexibility to the federal government to pursue a growth agenda that I think is exactly what this country needs. I mean, look at where the economic growth is, see the challenges around the world, look at the federal budget and look at the state budgets as this fiscal cliff in health starts to emerge. We have a problem. And what we need to do is address it. And certainly the Treasurer and I are determined to start on that right now and not kick it down to someone else.
So what's the future if it doesn't go to
Well, again, I mean, we have put forward a concrete proposal today. We will be, both the Treasurer and I will be talking to our counterparts over the coming couple of weeks. We remain open to other people's ideas, and obviously the federal government will have some strong views on this as well. But what we want to do is ensure that this state, and indeed every state across the country, is in a position to fund its health. We think it's very important the Gonski agreement is completed as it was intended, and all of those things are things that the states are fighting for. Obviously, we're open to other ideas and working with other proposals, but to do nothing is not an option.
Mr Turnbull had a keen eye for history. He'd know that John Hewson failed in the initial attempt to introduce the GST. John Howard managed to do it. Do you think he's prepared, notwithstanding his apparent popularity, to risk such a sell to the electorate in his first year as Prime Minister?
I honestly think that the community is at a position where they're sick of the usual political noise and the inevitable scare campaigns that come, and I think you saw that here in New South Wales. I mean, the world was going to fall in relation to the lease of the electricity assets, but by the time we got to the vote, I mean, Labor hardly participated in the parliament, and look, the world's not falling in. So I think the community wants an honest discussion, and if we explain the details of the challenges that we have in health, if we explain the need to grow the economy, I think they would be open to it. And if they listen and understand some of the compensation measures we put in place, the overall package I think is very powerful. And I think that the people of Australia can see through the inevitable scare campaigns that come, the populism that will come, because ultimately, this is not about getting in and seeking re-election or having the capacity to continue in government. It's about doing what is right for the people of this country. And ultimately, that's what we're given the privilege of doing. Again, we've put forward a mix, but that would be ultimately up to the federal government. And whether you put less into corporate tax and more into income tax, or vice versa, that'll be a matter for them to be determined. What we're saying is that there is a capacity with a significant, over $30 billion on an annual basis that can go into a growth package to get the economy moving, provide additional resources into the critical services we need. We think that is a good thing, and ultimately the package and how it's determined, well, that's to come. But what we put forward, I think, is a very concrete proposal, trying to bring consensus at a time when there's a number of different opinions out there.
But the health funding shortfall...
Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, mate. The health funding shortfall increases exponentially after 2020, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Starts it, yep.
So are you seriously telling us that the economic growth that may occur from the tax cuts that may be introduced as part of the proposal is going to be enough to cover that huge and escalating funding shortfall out to 2030?
Well, and that's a part of the reason we have said, well, let's go to 2020, and we have an ability to assess it. Now, obviously, there's some modelling that will suggest how much the economy will grow, how much revenue is available, but importantly, what we're saying is we have a problem, we're starting to address it, and at 2020 we come back together, because the key part of this, at the moment, we're apart. I mean, there is a sense that the states have to deal with this and the federal government has to deal with this. We need to come together on it, and that is a big part of this. If we come together and say, OK, we're going to solve this together, by the time we get to 2020, we'll have a whole range of issues to consider, how much progress we've made in terms of making the hospital system as efficient as we possibly can, but at the same time, how much has the economy grown, what's the fiscal position of the federal budget, and that's an honest thing we need to consider. I mean, they can't spend money they don't have, and that seems to be ignored by our opponents in this debate, but we'll have a much better basis to discuss those issues, and we can do it together, and that is the important thing.
At that point, all the states are in the same boat. Are you saying it's an ideological resistance from states like Queensland?
Well, no, I think there's. I mean, I point to Jay Weatherill that's had the courage to say what is in the best interests of the people of his state and country, and he's prepared to consider it. When he hasn't said yes, let's do it, he's prepared to consider it and prepared to say, well, the real concerns have been put, so the issues of compensation. Well, let's work through those. And I think that is commendable. I think that what people want to see in this debate is leaders such as Jay who are prepared to consider the challenges we're facing, consider all options and address the concerns. So don't address the knee-jerk politics that comes very quickly, and we've seen this for many months, well, many years in this country. The moment that this is mentioned, well, everyone picks up their political badges and they're able to score political points on a daily basis. This is big. The challenges in our health system in the long term are very, very significant. We wouldn't be here otherwise, and we need to solve it.
Is the biggest challenge for the government being able to convince the electorate that they're going to get more back, being able to get income? And if so, if that happens to be the case, the federal government think this plan's palatable if they're actually losing money out of what you're putting forward?
I mean, they're obviously the details that we can work through over coming weeks. I mean, the model suggests it can be done. Obviously, we need to work through that. But, I mean, in simple terms, we say to the people in New South Wales and indeed across the country that we have a capacity here to deal with some of the biggest challenges we have, which is how we fund our health system in the long term. We have a plan that actually grows the economy. So rather than putting a handbrake, we grow it. So there's more investment, more jobs, more employment, economic growth, which gives us the capacity to actually deliver the services that we need. Everyone relies on their health services on a daily basis. We need to ensure that they're funded, not just today, but in the long term. And that ultimately is critical from the states, and it's critical to everyone.
You're a teenager and died after using synthetic cannabis. Is that government doing enough to crack down on synthetic drugs? It's quite legislation.
I haven't seen all the details of that. I mean, I've asked for that report to be provided. I mean, obviously, we'll look at that. We've obviously previously announced some initiatives in relation to that, but I need to understand exactly what has transpired here and whether we need to take actions to address.
All right, we'll leave the New South Wales Premier, Mike Baird, there largely until that last question talking about the GST and his proposal for how it could be carved up to provide income tax cuts, compensation